The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung wrote that, but what he discovered about highly sensitive people who reach this point will change how you see emotional intelligence forever. Look, we've all met that person who just seems to absorb everyone else's drama. You know the type. They're the one everyone calls during a crisis, the shoulder everyone cries on, the person who somehow ends up managing everyone else's emotional mess while their own needs get completely ignored. Carl Jung spent his career studying what he called psychological individuation, basically how people become their authentic selves. But he noticed something fascinating about highly sensitive individuals. They weren't just feeling more deeply than others, they were actually processing emotional information at a completely different level. Here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Jung discovered that when these empathic people finally hit their breaking point, they don't just fall apart. They transform into something that's honestly a little terrifying in the best possible way. Think about the last time someone took advantage of your kindness. Maybe a friend who only called when they needed something, or a coworker who dumped their responsibilities on you because they knew you wouldn't say no. Hold that feeling for a second, because what I'm about to share might just change how you handle those situations forever. The foundation: Jung's theory of psychological types. Before we dive into the transformation Jung witnessed, you need to understand his groundbreaking work on psychological types. Jung identified that people process information through different dominant functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. But he discovered something remarkable about highly sensitive individuals. They often developed what he called superior feeling function combined with intuitive perception. This isn't just being emotional. It's having a sophisticated psychological radar system that most people never develop. Jung realized that empaths naturally become experts at reading microexpressions, voice tonality, energy patterns, and behavioral inconsistencies. They're essentially walking lie detectors who've been taught to doubt their own accuracy. The Jungian concept of the shadow. Jung's most revolutionary insight was his theory of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've been conditioned to reject or hide. For most people, the shadow contains aggression, selfishness, or socially unacceptable desires. But for empaths, Jung discovered something different. Their shadow often contains their strength, their boundaries, and their right to prioritize their own well-being. Society teaches empaths that their natural psychological gifts are too much or too sensitive. So they learn to suppress not just their emotions, but their incredibly accurate perceptions about people and situations. This creates what Jung called neurotic suffering, pain that comes from living against your natural psychological type. The awakening Jung witnessed. Jung worked with countless patients who'd been what he called emotional absorbers their whole lives. These folks had a pattern. They'd been the family mediator, the friend who fixed everyone's problems, the employee who stayed late to cover for others. But something interesting happened when these people reached what Jung termed their individuation crisis, usually triggered by a major betrayal or boundary violation. Instead of breaking down, they started seeing patterns they'd been blind to for years. Take Jennifer, a marketing manager from Chicago. She'd spent 3 years covering for her boss's mistakes, working weekends to fix his screw-ups, and taking the blame when projects went sideways. When she finally discovered he'd been taking credit for her ideas in executive meetings, something clicked. It wasn't anger. It was like suddenly seeing the whole chessboard instead of just my piece. I realized I'd been gathering data on his behavior patterns for years without knowing it. If you've ever felt like you see people's true intentions way before others do, drop a comment. I've always been watching. This is what Jung called shadow integration, when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they'd been taught to suppress. For empaths, this often means acknowledging their incredible ability to read people and situations.
The neuroscience behind Jung's observations. Modern research has validated many of Jung's insights about highly sensitive people. Dr. Elaine Aron's work on sensory processing sensitivity shows that approximately 20% of the population has nervous systems that process information more deeply. These individuals have more active mirror neurons, stronger emotional processing centers, and heightened awareness of subtleties in their environment. Jung intuited this neurological difference decades before we had the technology to measure it. He recognized that empaths weren't just feeling more, they were processing social and emotional data at a fundamentally different level than most people. The 3 stages of empath evolution. Through his work, Jung identified a pretty consistent pattern in how sensitive people develop psychological resilience. Stage 1. The unconscious caretaker. You're the family therapist, the office mom, the friend who always has tissues ready. You feel responsible for everyone's emotions and somehow think their problems are your fault. In Jungian terms, you're living primarily through your feeling function while suppressing your thinking function and intuitive insights. Jung observed that people in this stage often develop what he called participation mystique. They can't distinguish between their own emotions and others. They literally absorb the psychological state of people around them without conscious awareness. Stage 2. The pattern recognition phase. Something happens, usually someone you trusted completely screws you over, and suddenly you start seeing manipulation tactics everywhere. You realize you've been reading the room perfectly for years. You just weren't trusting what you saw. Jung called this the activation of the transcendent function, when your conscious mind finally integrates with your unconscious perceptions. It's like having your intuitive radar come online consciously for the first time. If you've reached the point where you can spot emotional manipulation from a mile away, comment, "My radar is finally working." Stage 3. The integrated empath. This is where things get interesting. You don't lose your sensitivity. You just become incredibly strategic about where you invest it. Jung observed that people in this stage become what he called consciously empathetic rather than compulsively helpful. In Jungian terms, you've successfully integrated your shadow aspects, boundaries, discernment, self-protection, with your natural gifts, empathy, intuition, and emotional intelligence. This creates what Jung called psychological wholeness. The psychological superpower Jung discovered. Here's what made Jung's research so groundbreaking. He realized that highly sensitive people aren't just feeling more, they're processing social and emotional data at an advanced level. It's like having emotional intelligence on steroids. Jung identified specific abilities that emerged when empaths completed their individuation process. Pattern recognition mastery, the ability to see behavioral patterns across time and predict how relationships and situations will unfold. Micro-expression reading, unconscious processing of facial expressions, voice tonality, and body language that reveal true emotional states. Energy assessment, the capacity to sense the emotional atmosphere of groups and individuals with remarkable accuracy. Motivation analysis, understanding the deeper psychological drives behind people's actions, often before they're conscious of these drives themselves. Mark, a small business owner from Portland, discovered this after his business partner tried to push him out of their company. Instead of getting emotional, Mark calmly laid out a detailed analysis of his partner's manipulation tactics over the past 2 years. I could see every move he was going to make before he made it. It was like watching someone play chess when you already know their entire strategy. Jung's theory of projection. Jung's theory of projection explains why empaths often struggle with their perceptions. When you can accurately read someone's hidden emotions or motivations, they often project their discomfort back onto you. They'll call you too sensitive, paranoid, or reading too much into things. This creates what Jung called psychological gaslighting, when your accurate perceptions are consistently invalidated, causing you to doubt your own psychological radar. Jung observed that empaths who break through this gaslighting phase become psychologically unshakable. The mirror effect that changes everything. Jung noticed something else interesting. When empaths complete this transformation, they don't have to actively call people out anymore. Their presence alone starts reflecting dysfunction back to people. Sarah, a teacher from Austin, experienced this at her family's Thanksgiving dinner. Without saying a word about her uncle's usual drunk rambling or her cousin's passive-aggressive comments, people started feeling uncomfortable around her. I wasn't being confrontational or mean, but somehow they could sense that I wasn't buying into the family's usual dysfunction anymore. It was like they felt seen through, and they didn't like it. If people started treating you differently when you stopped accepting their drama, comment, "They felt the shift before I said anything." This is what Jung called the mirror effect. Transformed empaths become living truth detectors, not through judgment, but through their simple refusal to engage with manipulation. Jung explained this phenomenon through his concept of the collective unconscious. When empaths stop participating in collective delusions or family dysfunction, their presence disrupts the psychological equilibrium that maintains these unhealthy patterns. The individuation process and relationship dynamics. Jung's work on individuation reveals why transformed empaths often experience dramatic changes in their relationships. As you become more psychologically integrated, you naturally stop attracting people who need you to be incomplete. This process can be lonely initially. Jung acknowledged that individuation often requires what he called temporary isolation, a period where you're no longer compatible with your old social ecosystem but haven't yet found your new one. Lisa, a nurse from Denver, experienced this during her transformation. It felt like I was speaking a different language. People who used to feel comfortable dumping their problems on me suddenly felt judged, even though I wasn't judging them. I was just no longer willing to absorb their emotional chaos. The collective shadow and empathic awareness. Jung's concept of the collective shadow helps explain why empaths often feel overwhelmed in group settings. They're not just picking up on individual psychological states, they're sensing the collective unconscious patterns of entire systems. This is why empaths often struggle in corporate environments, dysfunctional families, or toxic social groups. They're unconsciously processing layers of collective denial, projection, and psychological dysfunction that others have learned to tune out. When empaths complete their individuation process, they develop what Jung called conscious relation to the collective shadow. They can sense these patterns without being overwhelmed by them. The ethical dilemma Jung wrestled with. Here's where things get really interesting and a little scary. Jung realized that empaths who reach this level of emotional intelligence could easily manipulate others if they wanted to. They understand human psychology well enough to push people's buttons with surgical precision. But here's the beautiful part. They choose not to. I could destroy my ex-husband's reputation with what I know about his insecurities, one patient shared. But that would make me just like him. Instead, I use my insights to protect myself and our kids. Jung found this restraint fascinating. These people had developed incredible psychological power but chose to use it defensively rather than offensively. He called it ethical individuation, the integration of power with moral development.
The anima-animus integration. Jung's concepts of anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, play a crucial role in empath transformation. Many empaths, regardless of gender, have overdeveloped their anima, receptive, nurturing, accommodating qualities, while suppressing their animus, assertive, boundary-setting, decisive qualities. The individuation process requires integrating both aspects. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive or losing your caring nature. It means developing what Jung called conscious feminine strength and integrated masculine discernment.
The network effect and synchronicity. Jung observed that transformed empaths naturally start attracting each other through what he called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reflect psychological alignment. They recognize the signs, the calm confidence, the ability to set boundaries without explanation, the skill at seeing through social performances. These networks become incredibly supportive because they're based on authentic connection rather than need or manipulation. Jung noted that these relationships often have a quality of psychological resonance, a deep recognition between individuated people. If you've started attracting people who energize you instead of draining you, comment, "I found my people." Active imagination and empathic development. Jung developed the technique of active imagination, consciously engaging with unconscious content through visualization and inner dialogue. For empaths, this becomes a powerful tool for processing the emotional information they absorb without being overwhelmed by it. Instead of unconsciously absorbing others' emotions, integrated empaths learn to consciously observe and analyze psychological patterns. This transforms their empathy from a passive absorption into an active, skillful intelligence. The transcendent function in daily life. Jung's concept of the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious, becomes highly developed in integrated empaths. This allows them to access intuitive insights while maintaining rational analysis. In practical terms, this means trusting your gut instincts about people and situations while also being able to articulate why something feels off. You develop what Jung called feeling-toned knowledge, emotional intelligence backed by logical understanding. Your personal integration guide. Based on Jung's observations about psychological development, here's how you can consciously work with your empathic abilities. Week 1. Shadow work, reclaiming your strength. Identify the qualities you've been taught to suppress. Are you afraid of being selfish when setting boundaries? Do you apologize for being too much when expressing needs? These suppressed qualities are often your greatest strengths. Week 2. Active imagination practice. When you absorb someone else's emotional state, practice conscious dialogue with it. Ask, whose emotion is this? What is it trying to communicate? How can I observe it without taking it on? Week 3. Projection awareness. Notice when people call you too sensitive or paranoid. Jung would say this is often projection. They're uncomfortable with your accurate perceptions. Practice responding, I notice you seem uncomfortable with my perspective. Week 4. Transcendent function development. Practice integrating your intuitive hits with logical analysis. When someone gives you bad vibes, explore both the feeling and the observable behaviors that trigger it. If you're ready to stop apologizing for your depth and start using it wisely, comment, I'm done shrinking myself. The collective transformation Jung predicted. Jung believed as more individuals complete their individuation process, humanity as a whole evolves psychologically. He saw empaths who integrate their gifts as pioneers in this collective development. The individual has always been the carrier of new possibilities, Jung wrote. When empaths stop participating in collective psychological dysfunction, they create space for healthier patterns to emerge. The practical benefits Jung documented. Jung tracked his patients long-term and found that empaths who completed this integration process experienced relationship sovereignty, ability to form connections based on choice rather than compulsion, professional clarity, enhanced ability to read workplace dynamics and make strategic decisions, emotional regulation, capacity to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, intuitive accuracy, trust in perceptual abilities leads to better life choices, psychological immunity, resistance to manipulation and gaslighting. The four functions integration. Jung's psychological types, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, become balanced in integrated empaths. Instead of being dominated by feeling function alone, they develop conscious thinking, ability to analyze emotional patterns objectively, refined sensation, awareness of physical and environmental cues, developed intuition, trust in unconscious perceptions, integrated feeling, emotional responses based on conscious choice. Your empath evolution checkpoint. Jung developed these questions to help people assess their integration progress. Can you feel others' emotions without taking responsibility for them? Do you trust your first impressions even when others disagree? Can you maintain your energy in emotionally chaotic environments? Do you attract relationships based on mutual respect rather than need? Can you support others without losing yourself in their problems? Are you comfortable with others' discomfort when you set boundaries? If you're answering yes to most of these, Jung would recognize you as someone who successfully integrated their empathic abilities. The Shadow's Gift, Integrated Power. Jung's final insight about empath transformation. Your sensitivity isn't weakness to overcome, it's sophisticated intelligence to be consciously directed. When you integrate your shadow, strength, boundaries, and discernment with your light, empathy, care, connection, you become what Jung called psychologically complete. Every boundary you've struggled to set, every manipulation you've endured, every time you've questioned your own perceptions, it's all been developing your psychological awareness. You've been building superpowers while thinking you were just surviving. Comment, I trust my empathic intelligence if you're ready to stop seeing your sensitivity as a problem and start using it as the guidance system it actually is. Because the world doesn't need more people pleasers who burn themselves out. It needs more conscious empaths who know their worth and aren't afraid to honor it. Jung's work proves that this transformation isn't just possible, it's the natural direction of psychological growth for sensitive people. The only question is whether you'll guide that evolution consciously or let life force it on you through painful lessons. Your sensitivity is your strength. Jung spent his career proving it. Now it's time to start living it.